Sherlock Holmes and the Haunting of Thornbury Village. Chapter 1. A summons to Thornbury. It was on a particularly bleak and blustery evening in the heart of January that I sat opposite my friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, in our familiar quarters at 221B Baker Street. Outside, the wind howled like a mournful spectre, rattling the window panes and sending errant flakes of snow skittering across the streets. Holmes, as was his wont during quieter moments, was engrossed in a monograph concerning the peculiarities of Mongolian throat-singing, a study that I confess held little appeal to my own sensibilities. The fire crackled warmly in the hearth, casting a flickering glow across the room, when Mrs. Hudson entered with a letter, the envelope trembling slightly in her hand. "It seems urgent, Mr. Holmes," she remarked, placing the letter upon the table. Her tone betrayed the faintest tremor, and I observed Holmes's sharp eyes dart toward her with mild curiosity. "Thank you, Mrs. Hudson," he replied. The moment she had departed, he reached for the envelope with his characteristic precision, examining it as though it were an artifact of great historical import. Said he, holding it to the light. "A cheap envelope, standard issue in provincial post offices, the ink a rushed hand, but determined. Watson, I suspect we are about to be drawn into an intriguing affair." Holmes broke the seal with a deft motion and unfolded the letter. As his keen eyes scanned the contents, his expression shifted from detached interest to something resembling animated concern. "Pray read this," he said, passing the letter to me. The missive, written in a hurried but legible hand, bore the signature of one Constable Rupert Henslow of Thornbury Village. It read as follows: "Mr. Holmes, I write to you in great distress, for our village of Thornbury is beset by a series of alarming events that defy all logic and reason. Two of our own, Lord Ambrose Redcliffe and Miss Henrietta Langridge, have met their ends under circumstances most peculiar and horrifying. The villagers, already trembling with fear, speak in hushed tones of a ghost, a woman in white, said to haunt the churchyard and woods at night. I fear that superstition clouds their judgment and blinds them to the possibility of a far more tangible threat. As the constable of this parish, I implore you to lend your great talents to uncovering the truth. The fear in this village grows with each passing day, and I dread that more lives may soon be lost if this mystery is not resolved. Yours in desperate hope, Constable Rupert Henslow." "What do you make of it, Watson?" Holmes asked, rising to retrieve his coat and hat. "The man appears earnest, and the matter serious, but surely the talk of ghosts can be dismissed as superstition?" "Perhaps," Holmes replied with a faint smile, "but superstition often masks a far more corporeal villainy. Make haste, my dear fellow. The game is afoot." Within the hour, we were aboard a train bound for the West Country, the rhythmic clatter of wheels upon the rails providing a steady backdrop to Holmes's musings. He remained uncharacteristically silent for much of the journey, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin as he gazed out at the snow-laden countryside. As for myself, I occupied the time pondering the letter and the curious aura of dread it conveyed. The village of Thornbury lay nestled amidst the desolate moors, its thatched cottages and cobblestone streets veiled in a shroud of mist as we arrived. The air was bitterly cold, and the wind carried with it an almost mournful wail as it swept through the skeletal branches of the trees. As we descended from the carriage, a stocky figure in a constable's uniform approached us, his face pale and drawn. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he greeted us, doffing his hat. "I am Rupert Henslow. Thank you for coming. We are sorely in need of your expertise." "Lead the way, Constable," said Holmes, his keen gaze already surveying the surroundings, "and spare no detail in recounting the events." As we walked through the village, Henslow explained the situation. The first death had occurred a fortnight prior, and the second just days ago. The villagers swear they saw a ghostly figure drifting through the churchyard on both nights, Henslow said. Some claim it's an omen of death. And what do you believe? Holmes inquired, his tone measured. Henslow hesitated. I believe someone wants us to be afraid. A rational deduction, Holmes murmured, his eyes flickering with interest. Fear is a powerful tool, but it is a poor substitute for the truth. We arrived at the village inn, where Holmes and I secured lodgings. That evening, as we sat by the fire, Holmes began his methodical questioning of Constable Henslow. The constable, though earnest, seemed to be struggling with the gravity of the situation, his voice wavering as he described the victims. Lord Redcliffe, Henslow began, glancing uneasily toward the door, was a man of considerable influence in the village, though not without his enemies. He had been embroiled in several disputes over land with the Langridge family, though the nature of the conflict was unclear. He was also known to be deeply involved in local charity work, yet his wealth and authority seemed to have earned him both respect and resentment. Henslow paused, his eyes flickering nervously. He was often seen walking the grounds of Thornbury Manor, especially after dark, though no one could say why. Holmes's gaze remained fixed on the constable, though his expression remained unreadable as Henslow continued. Miss Langridge, on the other hand, was a widow who had lived in Thornbury for several years. She was well regarded, even admired by most of the villagers, though there were rumors of a falling out with some of the local families, including Redcliffe. Miss Langridge was a woman of sharp mind and wit, and she made no effort to hide her opinions, which, I suppose, may have led to friction with those who didn't agree with her views. Despite that, she was well liked by many, especially those in the village who knew her through the church. At this point, Henslow hesitated. As for their deaths, he swallowed hard. Lord Redcliffe was found one morning beneath a statue in his garden, crushed, though there were no marks or signs of struggle. It was as if he had simply fallen, though there was no way to explain how that could have happened. And Miss Langridge? Holmes interjected, his voice calm but insistent. Miss Langridge's death was even more perplexing, Henslow replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. She was found inside her locked cottage, strangled by a cord, thin, almost invisible. No one knows where it came from, and there were no signs of a struggle, no footprints, no clues at all. Holmes's eyes sparkled with interest, but he said nothing, allowing the constable to continue. The villagers, Henslow went on, are all convinced that these deaths are connected to a ghost. They say the ghost haunts the churchyard, and that the figure, always seen in white, is a harbinger of death, but no one dares speak too openly about it. The fear is palpable. Holmes sat in deep thought for a moment, his fingers steepled before him. The only sound in the dimly lit room was the quiet crackling of the fire. Then, with a slow and deliberate exhalation, he turned his gaze toward Henslow. "That will be all for now, Constable," Holmes said, his tone calm yet firm. "You have provided ample information, and I trust you will not speak too freely of our conversation to the villagers. Fear spreads quickly, and in a case such as this, speculation only serves to cloud the truth." Henslow hesitated for a fraction of a second, then gave a curt nod. "Understood, Mr. Holmes." He stood, adjusting his coat with a nervous energy, then cast a final glance toward the window, as though expecting something, or someone, beyond the shadows. "I will continue to make my rounds," he added, his voice quieter now. "But if you require anything, you know where to find me." "A curious case, Watson," Holmes remarked once Henslow had departed. "Two deaths, seemingly unconnected, save for their air of the macabre, and a village steeped in superstition. Yet there is always a thread if one knows where to look. As we retired for the night, I could not help but feel a chill that had little to do with the weather. The villagers watched us from behind curtains and half-open doors, their faces pale and their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and suspicion. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated by the challenge, his sharp features alight with the thrill of the hunt. "Mark my words, Watson," he said, as we climbed the stairs to our lodgings. "This village holds a secret, and I mean to uncover it. Ghosts may haunt the imagination, but it is flesh and blood that leaves such tantalizing clues. The morning mist lingered heavily over the village of Thornbury, shrouding its thatched roofs and winding lanes in a spectral haze. As Holmes and I ventured forth from the inn, the damp chill of the moorland air seemed to seep into our very bones. The streets, though narrow and cobbled, were devoid of their usual bustle. Thornbury's villagers preferred the safety of their hearths to the lingering dread of the outdoors, where whispers of a ghostly presence hung as thickly as the fog. As our first encounter that day was with Mrs. Agnes Chilcot, a woman of advancing years with a hunched frame and a manner that vacillated between piety and fear. She greeted us at the doorway of her modest cottage, her sharp eyes darting nervously as though she expected the spectral figure to materialize behind us at any moment. "You've seen the ghost, Mrs. Chilcot?" Holmes inquired, his tone calm but probing. "Oh, indeed I have, Mr. Holmes," she replied, clutching at the crucifix that hung about her neck. "It was last Tuesday, just as the church bells rang for evensong. I was returning from the well when I saw her, a veiled figure, all in white, drifting near the churchyard. She moved so silently, not a whisper of footsteps, and then she vanished, just like that, into the air." Her eyes widened with the vividness of her recollection, and she made the sign of the cross. Holmes regarded her with his customary neutrality, though I caught the faintest flicker of interest in his expression. "And this apparition," he said, "did you notice anything unusual about her beyond the manner of her appearance?" Mrs. Chilcot hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as they toyed with the fabric of her apron. She carried something," she murmured at last. "A lantern, I think, though it cast no light. And there was a strange smell in the air, like burning. I thought it must be the fires of the damned." I felt a deep unease at her words, though Holmes, as ever, remained impassive. His keen eyes lingered on Mrs. Chilcot for a moment longer before he gave a slight nod. "Thank you, Mrs. Chilcot," he said. "You have been most helpful." As we departed, I turned to my companion. "A veiled figure, a phantom lantern, and a smell of burning," I mused. "Surely you don't believe—" Holmes interrupted me with a raised hand. "Believe, Watson, is a word best left to theologians and poets. My concern is with the facts. And as for Mrs. Chilcot's account, there is more truth to be gleaned from what she concealed than from what she revealed." I could only marvel at his certainty as we made our way to Thornbury Manor, the scene of the first tragedy. The gardens of Thornbury Manor, once the pride of Lord Redcliffe's estate, lay in disrepair, their hedges overgrown and their flower-beds choked with weeds. The toppled statue of a knight, its stone visage cracked and weathered, dominated the scene. Holmes immediately set to work, his magnifying glass glinting in the faint sunlight as he examined the statue's base. "Observe, Watson," he said, gesturing to the faint scratches along the plinth. "These marks suggest that the statue was not merely unbalanced by age or decay, but deliberately tampered with. Note the symmetry of the scratches. A tool, perhaps a crowbar, was employed here." I crouched beside him, my eye following the line of his finger. "But why? To what purpose?" Holmes straightened, his gaze sweeping across the garden. "Lord Redcliffe was a man of influence and power," he remarked. "A fallible man, no doubt, as such men often are. But the manner of his death was staged to inspire fear, not merely to kill. Whoever orchestrated this wished to cloak their deed in the guise of the supernatural." He knelt again, brushing aside the frost-dappled grass to reveal faint impressions in the soil. "A second pair of footprints," he murmured, "one leading toward the statue, the other away. Small, perhaps a woman's." "The ghost?" I ventured. Holmes gave a dry chuckle. "Hardly. Ghosts rarely trouble themselves with manual labor. Come, Watson, let us not waste the daylight." Our next destination was Langridge Cottage, a modest but well-maintained dwelling at the edge of the village. The interior bore no signs of struggle, though the air within was heavy with the scent of soot and ashes. Holmes's keen eyes swept the room, taking in every detail. The unlit oil lamp upon the table, the arrangement of the chairs, and the faint smear of black upon the window-sill. "What do you deduce from this, Watson?" he asked, gesturing to the smear. I examined it closely. "It appears to be soot," I said, "but what could account for its presence here?" Holmes's gaze flickered with approval. "An excellent question, my dear friend. The answer lies in the ashes outside the door, coupled with the faint scent of paraffin in the air. A fire was lit here recently, perhaps as a distraction or a signal. Yet our killer is meticulous. Notice how carefully the room was left undisturbed, save for that one small detail." He moved to the door, examining the latch with great interest. "The cord that strangled Miss Langridge left no visible trace, you say? Consider then the peculiar tension of this latch. It has been tampered with, likely to create a mechanical means of murder, ingenious yet chillingly impersonal." I felt a shiver course through me at the cold precision of the crime. "And the ghost? Do you suppose this ghost is nothing more than an elaborate fabrication?" Holmes's eyes narrowed as he pocketed his magnifying glass. "The ghost is but a mask, Watson, a device to divert attention and sow terror. Our true adversary is a mind both calculating and resourceful, intent on cloaking their vengeance in the trappings of the otherworldly. But mark my words, the threads of this mystery are beginning to unravel." As we returned to the village, I could not help but reflect on the strange and sinister nature of our findings. Holmes, as ever, seemed invigorated by the challenge, his quick strides and sharp eyes betraying the workings of his formidable intellect. "You believe the two deaths are connected, then?" I asked as we approached the inn. "Indubitably," he replied. "The staging of the scenes, the calculated use of fear, and the meticulous attention to detail all point to a single orchestrator. But the question remains, what motivates such an elaborate charade? Revenge, perhaps, or a desire to punish the village for some perceived wrong? The answer, Watson, lies not in the spectral, but in the all-too-human." With these enigmatic words, Holmes ascended the steps to our lodgings, leaving me to ponder the nature of the darkness that had settled over Thornbury. Ghosts may haunt the imagination, but it was clear that the true terror lay in the flesh-and-blood villain who sought to manipulate it to their advantage. Chapter 2. Whispers of Fear and Flesh. The following morning broke with a wan light that struggled to pierce the stubborn veil of mist over Thornbury. The pervasive gloom seemed to weigh heavily upon the village, and as we walked its narrow lanes, I observed the furtive glances and hushed whispers of its inhabitants. It was as though the very air carried a sense of foreboding. Holmes, however, was in high spirits. His keen eyes scanned every detail of our surroundings, and I could almost hear the cogs of his brilliant mind turning. Our destination that morning was the local parish records office, where Holmes hoped to glean insights into the village's murky past. The records office, a dim and dusty chamber adjoining the church, was overseen by a bespectacled clerk who eyed us with equal parts suspicion and curiosity. Holmes's reputation, it seemed, had preceded him even here. With his usual charm, he persuaded the clerk to grant us access to the archives, and we soon found ourselves poring over a collection of brittle ledgers and faded documents. The Fairbairn family, Holmes muttered as he traced his finger along an entry. Their lineage in Thornbury goes back centuries, yet here, 10 years ago, the name abruptly vanishes. Curious, is it not? It coincides with the murder of the Fairbairn family, I observed. Indeed, Holmes replied. And note this, several transactions recorded between Lord Redcliffe and one Jonathan Fairbairn shortly before the murders. The sums involved are not inconsiderable. It seems there was a financial entanglement of some kind. Do you suppose it led to their deaths? I ventured. Possibly, Holmes said, his eyes narrowing. But there is more here, Watson. A pattern, if you will. Miss Langridge, too, had dealings with the Fairbairns, though the nature of those dealings is obscured. Thornbury's gentry appear to have been closely intertwined with the family, and not always amicably. Holmes gathered several notes and closed the ledger with a decisive snap. This is sufficient for now. Let us continue our inquiries elsewhere. Our next visit was to the workshop of Oswald Pemberton, a reclusive inventor who had gained a reputation for his ingenious contraptions. His workshop, located on the outskirts of the village, was a ramshackle affair, its roof sagging under the weight of accumulated years. The interior, however, was a different matter entirely. Every available surface was covered with tools, gears, and half-finished devices, all arranged with an eccentric precision. Pemberton himself was a wiry man with a shock of unruly hair and eyes that gleamed with a manic energy. He greeted us with surprising warmth, though his gaze lingered on Holmes with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Sherlock Holmes, I presume, the greatest detective in this world?" he exclaimed, with a sudden burst of enthusiasm. "I'm your biggest fan." "Your reputation precedes you, Mr. Pemberton," Holmes replied. "I understand you have a gift for mechanical ingenuity." Pemberton beamed at the compliment and began demonstrating some of his creations. There was a clockwork bird that trilled a haunting melody, a series of pulleys designed to lift heavy loads with minimal effort, and a trapdoor mechanism that operated with almost eerie smoothness. "Fascinating," Holmes remarked as he examined the pulley system. "Your designs are remarkably sophisticated. Tell me, Mr. Pemberton, have you ever been approached to create devices for unconventional purposes?" Pemberton's smile faltered, and he scratched his head. "Unconventional? What do you mean?" "Devices that might be employed for less than noble ends," Holmes said, his tone casual but his eyes watchful. The inventor's expression grew guarded. "I make machines, Mr. Holmes. What people do with them is their business, not mine." Holmes said nothing further on the matter, but before we took our leave, he meticulously examined the workshop once more. His sharp eyes lingered on the intricate mechanisms scattered across the tables, the precision of the tools, and the peculiar alignment of the devices. He ran his fingers over the gears of a half-assembled contraption, his expression unreadable, yet intense, as though committing every detail to memory. Only then did he straighten, and with a curt nod to Pemberton gesture for us to depart. I noted the thoughtful look in his eyes as we stepped outside. As we walked back toward the village, I could not help but voice my unease. "Holmes, do you truly believe that the ghost is nothing more than a fabrication? And what of the Fairbairn family? Could they have some connection to this mystery?" Holmes stopped abruptly and turned to me, his expression unreadable. "Watson, a ghost cannot leave fingerprints, but guilt certainly does. The Fairborns, the deaths of Redcliffe and Langridge, and the spectre that haunts this village, they are all connected. The key is to untangle the threads before another tragedy strikes. His words, though enigmatic, carried a weight that sent a chill through me. As we resumed our walk, I could not help but feel that we were standing on the precipice of a revelation that would shake the very foundations of Thornbury. The stillness of the night was shattered by a distant cry carried through the frost-laden air like the tolling of an alarm bell. I awoke with a start, my senses momentarily disoriented by the abruptness of the disturbance. The faint echoes of raised voices reached my ears, mingling with the brisk crunch of hurried footsteps outside the inn. "Watson!" Holmes's voice was sharp, though tinged with an unmistakable note of exhilaration. "It seems our ghost has decided to make an appearance. Get dressed at once." Before I could fully grasp the situation, Holmes had already thrown on his overcoat and was reaching for his hat. I followed suit with as much haste as my half-asleep state could muster, and within minutes we were out in the chill night air, making our way toward the source of the commotion. A frantic clamor of voices and hurried footsteps echoing from the direction of the churchyard. The churchyard lay cloaked in a ghostly pall of mist, its ancient gravestones casting elongated shadows in the light of the moon. A small crowd of villagers had gathered at the edge of the grounds, their faces pale and drawn as they whispered among themselves. A few held lanterns, their feeble glow barely piercing the gloom. "What have you seen?" Holmes demanded, his commanding presence cutting through the murmurs. "It's her!" cried a man at the front, his voice trembling. "The ghost! The woman in white! She was here, drifting among the graves, and then she vanished into the woods." Holmes's eyes narrowed as he scanned the churchyard, his gaze sweeping over the gravestones and the shadowy periphery of the woods beyond. "Watson, fetch a lantern, quickly." I complied, and together we entered the churchyard, leaving the villagers to their fearful speculations. Holmes's movements were deliberate, his sharp eyes seeking out any irregularity in the frost-covered ground. Near the edge of the graveyard, he paused, crouching low to examine a set of footprints. "Fresh," he murmured. "Smaller than a man's, though the depth suggests a considerable weight. Watson, observe how the stride alters here, as though the figure was moving quickly, almost running. And there, do you see?" He pointed to a faint scuff mark on a low stone wall bordering the churchyard, as though something had brushed against it in haste. Without another word, Holmes rose and began following the trail, his lantern held aloft to illuminate the way. I stayed close behind, my nerves taut with anticipation. The footprints led us into the woods, where the shadows grew deeper and the air colder. The eerie quiet was broken only by the crunch of our boots on the frosty ground. Suddenly, the trail came to an abrupt end. "Here," Holmes said, kneeling once more. "The footprints stop, yet there are faint indentations in the soil. Something was placed here, and recently—" He began searching the immediate area, his keen eyes darting from one detail to the next. It was not long before he let out a soft exclamation and held up a fragment of wax. "Curious," he remarked. "And over there, fabric. Watson, bring the light closer." I stepped forward, illuminating a torn piece of white cloth caught on a low branch. Holmes took it with care, holding it up to examine its texture. "A mannequin," he concluded, "a crude facsimile, dressed to resemble the ghostly figure our villagers are so terrified of. And look here, wheel marks. Someone wheeled it to this point and left it here to be seen." "But why?" I asked, bewildered. "What purpose could this deception serve?" "Patience, Watson," Holmes replied, his tone calm but firm. The answer lies in the details. He continued his search, finding faint mechanical marks on the ground where the mannequin had likely been manipulated. Satisfied with his findings, he rose to his full height and gestured for us to return to the village. Back at our lodgings, Holmes set to work examining the evidence we had collected. The fragment of wax was placed on the table alongside the piece of cloth, and he studied them intently, his magnifying glass in hand. The faint marks on the cloth revealed traces of soot, which he noted with interest. "This wax is not ordinary," he said after a time. "It is of a type used in the making of molds for casting, and the fabric, though simple in appearance, bears traces of industrial oils. Someone with access to mechanical tools and materials crafted this mannequin." I watched him with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Holmes, do you mean to suggest that this ghost is nothing more than an elaborate trick?" He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Precisely, Watson. The ghost is a ruse designed to obscure a much larger scheme. The question is, who benefits from such a charade, and why?" I could offer no answer, and Holmes did not press the matter. Instead, he rose and began pacing the room, his expression thoughtful. "We must act quickly," he said at last. "The longer this dissection continues, the greater the danger to this village. Watson, I will need you to keep a discreet watch on Mrs. Chilcot tomorrow. Her knowledge of the village and its history makes her a potential source of valuable information, though she may not yet realize it." "And where will you be?" I asked. "I shall pay another visit to Mr. Pemberton," Holmes replied. "The marks we found in the woods suggest a mechanical element to this scheme, and Pemberton's workshop is the most likely source of such devices. Though I had my doubts about the wisdom of splitting our efforts, I trusted Holmes's judgment implicitly. As the night wore on, I could not help but feel a growing unease. The mystery of Thornbury deepened with every revelation, and I could not shake the feeling that we were drawing ever closer to the heart of a sinister truth. Before retiring, Holmes offered one final remark, his tone as measured as ever. "Remember, Watson, the most convincing lies are those that prey upon our deepest fears. This ghost is no spectre, but the shadow of something or someone far more tangible. And that is where we must focus our efforts." His words lingered in my mind long after the candle was extinguished, and I drifted into an uneasy sleep, haunted by the spectres of our investigation. Chapter 3. The Web of Dissection. The morning air was thick with the whispers of villagers, their hushed voices carrying rumours of another misfortune at the churchyard, where a fresh calamity had unfolded. The legend of the ghost of Thornbury had gained new momentum overnight, and with it, the pervasive grip of fear tightened over the village like an unseen noose. Holmes and I had just taken our breakfast when a frantic pounding at the door signalled another urgent summons. It was Constable Henslow, his face pale and his hands trembling. "It's happened again," he announced grimly. "Old Mr. Joseph Barrow found unconscious near the churchyard with a terrible wound on his head. He may not last the day." Holmes rose swiftly, his expression sharp and unreadable. "Take us to him at once, Constable. We must see his condition before examining the site." At the village hospital, we found Mr. Barrow lying unconscious, his head swathed in bandages. The attending physician, Dr. Alastair Moore, greeted us with a grave expression. "He suffered a severe blow to the head," he explained. "It is fortunate he was found when he was attacked, or the cold might have finished what the assailant began. He has not yet regained consciousness, but I believe he will survive." Holmes bent over the elderly man's still form, his keen eyes scrutinizing the wound and the bruising around it. He muttered to himself as he straightened. A blunt instrument, wielded with precision, no struggle. This was not an accident. After questioning Dr. Moore further and learning that nothing had been stolen from Mr. Barrow, we departed for the scene of the attack. The churchyard was enshrouded in mist as we arrived, lending it an eerie, almost spectral quality. The area where Mr. Barrow had been found remained disturbed, with traces of footprints and scattered debris marking the site of the attack. A small gathering of villagers loitered nearby, their murmurs interwoven with prayers and superstitious whispers. Some cast nervous glances toward the gravestones, as though expecting the apparition to appear before them. Holmes moved swiftly, his eyes scanning the ground with practiced precision. "See here, Watson," he said, gesturing to the marks. "These grooves are not random. They suggest the use of a wheeled apparatus, possibly something designed to move a structure into place. And note this, traces of burnt oil in the earth, hardly the relic of a spectre." I peered closer and noted a series of parallel grooves in the mud, subtle but distinct. "What do you make of them, Holmes?" "They are mechanical in nature," he replied. "And look here, traces of oil, faint but undeniable. Our so-called ghost is not merely a spectre of fear, but a construct of engineering." He exhaled sharply. "It appears our unseen hand is growing bolder." Later that afternoon, as Holmes pondered the latest incident, I found myself engaged in an observation of my own. Mrs. Agnes Chilcot, the village gossip, and one of our most vocal informants regarding the ghostly sightings, was moving with an uncharacteristic air of secrecy. Instead of her usual aimless wanderings, she was walking with purpose, clutching a small envelope in her gloved hands. I decided to follow at a discreet distance. She moved swiftly through the winding village lanes, glancing over her shoulder with nervous anticipation. Eventually, she arrived at a secluded corner near the vicarage, where a figure cloaked in heavy garments awaited her. Their face remained obscured by the hood of a long, dark coat. Mrs. Chilcot handed over the envelope, her voice a strained whisper. "It is done. I have done what you asked, but I beg you, let this be the end." The figure did not reply, but took the envelope with a slow, deliberate motion before retreating into the mist. Mrs. Chilcot stood frozen for a moment, as though fearing pursuit, then hastily turned on her heel and disappeared down another path. I remained hidden until both were out of sight, my mind ablaze with questions. Returning to the inn, I relayed the encounter to Holmes, who listened intently, his fingers steepled. When I finished, he merely nodded, a knowing gleam in his eye. "Very good, Watson. The threads of our mystery tighten. This is no mere ghost story. It is a scheme of considerable ingenuity, one that preys upon the fears of the villagers while concealing a deeper purpose." "Do you suppose Mrs. Chilcot is complicit in these events?" I asked. "Not entirely," Holmes replied. "Fear can make accomplices of the unwilling. However, it is the cloaked figure who interests me most. They hold the key to this deception." In the evening, Holmes led me back to the churchyard under the cover of darkness, lantern in hand. He crouched where Joseph Barrow had been found, carefully examining the remnants of the scene. Though the constable had done his best to secure the area, there were still traces left behind, overlooked in the chaos of the day. "Watson," Holmes said, running his fingers lightly over the ground, "note the disturbance here. These markings indicate movement beyond a mere scuffle. Someone took great care in constructing an elaborate setup." I knelt beside him, squinting in the dim light. "You suspect more than one individual?" "Perhaps," he murmured. "See this faint track?" A wheeled mechanism was used here, likely to create the illusion of something spectral gliding through the graveyard. More importantly, note the presence of oil, burnt just as before. Our ghost is no spirit, but an invention of precise engineering. He stood abruptly, brushing dust from his coat. This dissection was designed to be seen, Watson. But the true trick lies in who was meant to believe it. As we left the churchyard, the village lay silent under the watchful moon, but I could not shake the feeling that unseen eyes lurked within the shadows, waiting. And for the first time, I felt the full weight of the mystery pressing down upon us, as though the very air carried its secret whispers. The game was no longer merely afoot. It was tightening its web around us. The morning light was dim, struggling to break through the mist that clung to Thornbury like a funeral shroud. The events of the previous day lingered heavily upon the village, each whispered conversation steeped in fear and superstition. Holmes, however, had no patience for ghosts and apparitions. He was already at work, his mind unraveling the elaborate deceptions at play. "Watson," he said, as he examined his notes at the breakfast table, "our so-called ghost is no phantom, but a construct of precision and calculation. The mechanism of these murders follows a distinct pattern, one that is too deliberate to be dismissed as mere chance." "You believe the same hand is responsible for all the deaths?" I asked. "Without a doubt," he replied. "The methodical staging, the absence of human interference in each instance, the presence of mechanical traces, it all points to a singular intellect at work. And I believe the answer lies with Mr. Oswald Pemberton." Pemberton's workshop stood on the outskirts of the village as we arrived. The heavy scent of oil and iron filled the air. Pemberton himself was at work, his hands blackened with grease, as he tightened the gears of a peculiar contraption upon his workbench. He looked up as we entered, his expression shifting between surprise and apprehension. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he greeted us, wiping his hands on a rag. "Back again, are you?" "Indeed," Holmes said smoothly, his gaze sweeping across the cluttered room. "I find myself intrigued by the artistry of your work, Mr. Pemberton. You possess an uncommon talent for mechanical design." Pemberton scoffed. "Flattery, Mr. Holmes. What is it you really want?" Holmes pulled a folded paper from his coat and laid it upon the workbench. "I wish to discuss this." Pemberton hesitated before unfolding the document. His face paled as he examined the rough sketches, intricate pulley systems, weighted triggers, and automated release mechanisms. "Where did you get these?" he demanded. "I found traces of your designs at the sites of both murders," Holmes said. "Someone has been utilizing your knowledge to enact a deadly scheme. The question is, were you aware of it?" Pemberton clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the paper. I had no idea," he muttered. "I've been working on various mechanical projects for years, but I never imagined someone must have stolen my work." "Or you were deceived into sharing it," Holmes interjected. "Tell me, Mr. Pemberton, have you shared your designs with anyone recently?" Pemberton hesitated. There was someone, a young woman. She showed great interest in my work, asked many questions about the applications of my devices. She claimed she was merely fascinated by engineering, and He broke off, shaking his head. "I never thought she would use it for something sinister." Holmes exchanged a glance with me before turning back to Pemberton. "You have been the unwitting accomplice to a grand deception, Mr. Pemberton. But tell me, do you possess any correspondence from this individual?" Pemberton frowned and rummaged through a pile of papers, pulling out a folded letter. Holmes took it and scanned its contents, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Curious. The handwriting is careful, almost deliberately neutral. But note the phrasing. But your designs are most ingenious, and I am grateful for your wisdom. This is no simple admirer. This is a calculated manipulator." He folded the letter and pocketed it. "Mr. Pemberton, I must ask you to keep this matter confidential for now. We are closing in on the truth, and I fear the perpetrator is more dangerous than we first assumed." As we walked back toward the village, I could see the weight of realization settling upon Holmes. His silence was unnerving, his sharp gaze fixed upon some unseen detail within his mind. "What are you thinking, Holmes?" I asked at last. "I am thinking, Watson," he said slowly, "that we are dealing with a mind as sharp as it is merciless. This is no crime of passion. This is an engineer's murder, a carefully orchestrated execution disguised as supernatural intervention. Our adversary is not simply seeking vengeance. They are crafting a legend, one murder at a time." A chill ran through me as I considered his words. The ghost of Thornbury was no ghost at all, but rather the shadow of a brilliant and ruthless mind. And that mind was still at work, spinning its intricate web, waiting for the next victim to fall. Chapter 4. Shadows of Guilt and Justice. The night air was heavy with a creeping chill as Holmes and I prepared ourselves for the evening's task. Thornbury had become a village of hushed whispers and wary glances, the latest reports of the spectral figure sending tremors of dread through its inhabitants. It was precisely this growing terror that Holmes sought to exploit. "Watson," Holmes said as he carefully adjusted the wick of his lantern, "fear is a most effective tool. Our adversary has wielded it skillfully, but tonight we shall turn it against them." The plan was simple: to lure out the so-called ghost and unmask the deception in front of the very people it sought to frighten. With the constable's reluctant assistance, Holmes had spread the word that the village green would be patrolled that night, hoping to force the apparition into the open. Shortly after midnight, we took our positions near the churchyard, concealed behind the low wall that bordered the village green. A scattering of villagers had gathered at a distance, their faces pale in the flickering glow of lanterns. Fear and anticipation warred in their expressions. For a long while, nothing stirred, save for the whispering wind. Then, as the bell in the church tower tolled the hour, a figure emerged from the mist. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. Draped in white, the figure glided with an unnatural smoothness across the ground, its form flickering like a phantom in the dim light. It carried a lantern that cast no true glow, only an eerie shimmer that danced upon the frost-covered grass. Holmes tensed beside me. "There," he murmured. "Now, Watson, be ready." Without hesitation, Holmes leapt over the wall, dashing toward the spectral figure. I followed in pursuit, heart pounding, as the apparition turned sharply and fled toward the moors. The chase was relentless. The figure moved swiftly, its pale form darting through the twisted undergrowth with an almost inhuman agility. Holmes, ever the predator in such pursuits, remained hot on its trail, his movements sure-footed and unyielding. I struggled to keep pace, the uneven terrain and biting wind conspiring to slow me. The moors stretched endlessly before us, their barren expanse punctuated by jagged rocks and patches of wild heather. The ghostly figure veered toward the Fairbourne estate, a place long abandoned and left to the mercy of time. It was a fitting refuge for a phantom. As we neared the estate, the figure suddenly vanished into the ruins. Holmes halted, holding up a hand to signal caution. "There, call it now, Watson," he whispered. "Stay close." We entered the decayed remains of the manor, its once grand walls now crumbling and draped in ivy. The silence was profound, disturbed only by the sound of our own measured steps. The air was thick with the scent of damp stone and rot, the echoes of the past pressing in around us. Holmes's lantern cast flickering shadows across the debris-strewn floor. Then, in the dim moonlight, he pointed to something half buried in the dirt. "Ah," he mused, "what have we here?" Ropes and pulleys, cleverly concealed among the ruins, lay before us. Holmes knelt, examining the setup with keen eyes. "Ingenious," he murmured. "The so-called ghost was never supernatural, Watson. It was a mechanism, a trick of shadows and cunning craftsmanship. But to what purpose?" I examined the scene beside him. The ropes were taut, extending into the darkness where they disappeared into a hidden recess. "A marionette of sorts," I suggested. "An illusion designed to terrify the villagers." "Quite so," Holmes agreed. "But who would go to such lengths?" A rustling sound interrupted his thoughts. In an instant, Holmes was on his feet, his gaze locked onto a darkened doorway ahead. "We are not alone," he said quietly. "Come, Watson, the true mystery awaits us yet." The sound came again, a shuffling movement from within the ruins. Holmes motioned for silence as we crept forward. I could feel my pulse quicken as we neared the doorway, the cold air thick with the scent of damp decay. With a swift movement, Holmes pushed open the rotting wooden door, revealing a shadowy corridor. We stepped inside, our lanterns casting trembling light upon the stone walls. Then we saw it. A hidden chamber, its walls lined with intricate gears, levers, and weights, an elaborate system designed to control the so-called ghost. The ropes led to a contraption that, when manipulated, could cause the figure to appear and disappear at will. Holmes's eyes gleamed with realization. So the ghost was but a stage performance all along, and here lies the theatre of deception. Before I could respond, another sound reached us, a low creak, as if something or someone was shifting within the darkness beyond the chamber. Holmes turned sharply, his gaze narrowing. "They are still here," he whispered, "and I intend to find them." Without hesitation, he stepped deeper into the ruins, his every movement precise and deliberate. I followed, my breath quickened by the knowledge that the architect of this elaborate charade was close, perhaps watching us at that very moment. The game was far from over, and as we advanced deeper into the ruins, I could not shake the feeling that we were drawing closer to a revelation far more sinister than we had anticipated. The air inside the Fairbourne estate was damp and heavy with the scent of decay, as though the crumbling manor itself had absorbed years of secrets and betrayal. Holmes and I advanced cautiously through the dilapidated corridors, our lantern casting flickering shadows that danced eerily along the stone walls. Somewhere within these halls, we were certain, lay the heart of the mystery. "Stay sharp, Watson," Holmes whispered, his revolver held low, but ready. "We are closing in on them. Desperation may drive them to reckless measures." We reached a large chamber, where moonlight spilled through a fractured window, casting pale streaks across the debris-strewn floor. In the center of the room, a table was laden with papers, mechanical diagrams, and half-assembled devices. Holmes moved toward the table, his eyes scanning the clutter with the precision of a hawk. Before he could speak, a voice echoed from the shadows. "I expected you, Mr. Holmes, but I had hoped you might arrive a little too late." A man stepped into the dim light, his angular features sharpened by the flickering glow of our lantern. Beside him, her dark hair partially concealed beneath a cloak, stood a woman whose gaze burned with defiance. Isabella Fairbourne. There was no mistaking the pain and conviction that lay beneath her stern demeanor. "I assume introductions are unnecessary," Holmes said smoothly, "but if you insist—" "I am Isabella Fairbourne," she interrupted, "and this is my fight." Her companion's voice was steady as he added, "Percival Hawksley. I swore to help Isabella bring this village to its knees for what they did to her family." Holmes nodded, as though confirming a suspicion. "Lord Redcliffe and Miss Langridge paid the price, I presume, for their involvement in the destruction of the Fairborns. And Joseph Barrow? Isabella's composure wavered. He was never supposed to be hurt. He was meant to be scared, to confess like the others. But things went wrong. As vengeance often does, Holmes remarked. Tell me, Miss Fairbairn, what justice can be found in spilling blood within these crumbling walls? Percival stepped between them, his eyes hard. The justice Thornbury never gave, the truth buried for a decade. They conspired against her family, took everything they had. We had no choice. There is always a choice, Holmes said softly, and you have made yours, but tonight you will make another. Surrender now and let the truth be revealed without further death, or face the consequences of clinging to vengeance. Percival's hand tightened around the table, his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. You think the constable will show leniency? That Thornbury will suddenly care for the Fairborns' suffering? Number they will brand Isabella a murderer. Holmes sighed. The truth will outlive vengeance, Mr. Hawksley. I can assure you of that. And now I suggest you... Percival darted to the far wall and yanked a hidden lever. A passage creaked open, revealing a tunnel that sloped downward into the earth. Without hesitation, he grabbed Isabella's hand and bolted. After them, Watson! Holmes shouted, and we plunged into the passageway. The narrow tunnel echoed with the sound of our pursuit, the cold air biting at our faces. The passage opened into a cavernous underground chamber, its walls lined with damp stone and ancient wooden beams. Percival and Isabella were halfway across when Holmes raised his voice. Hawksley, stop this madness before it is too late. Percival turned, panting, his grip still firm on Isabella's arm. It is already too late. Holmes advanced a step. You are wrong. Nothing is too late until you surrender to despair. The mechanisms you used were clever, ingenious even, but they are tools of fear. Surrender them now and let justice take its proper course. Isabella's eyes filled with tears. You don't understand what this village did to us. They buried the truth, Mr. Holmes. Do you think they'll let it rise now? Yes, Holmes said firmly, because they will have no choice. With your cooperation, the evidence will expose Thornbury's sins, but if you run, you give them the perfect excuse to dismiss you as criminals. Percival hesitated, his hand trembling. The weight of Holmes's words seemed to bear down on him. He looked at Isabella, their shared grief palpable. Percival's grip on Isabella's hand tightened. We can't let them take us, Isabella. We've come too far for this. Isabella pulled away, her voice trembling but defiant. And where does this lead, Percival? Another death, another ruined life? They're right. We've lost control. Percival's eyes darted between her and Holmes, desperation flickering in his gaze. We can still escape. We have the tunnel and the traps. We can vanish. Holmes took a step forward, his tone commanding. Running will only confirm your guilt, Hawksley. And when you're caught, and you will be caught, your story will be buried alongside your bodies. Do you want the Fairborns to be remembered as murderers or as victims whose truth finally saw the light of day? Percival shook his head, anger and despair warring on his face. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, Holmes interrupted. Your intentions were noble, but your methods have failed you. Surrender now while you still have the chance to shape how this story ends. Isabella placed a hand on Percival's arm. Percival, she said softly, we promised to restore my family's name, not destroy ourselves. If we run now, we'll never have that chance. Percival's breath hitched. For a moment I feared he might turn violent, but then, with a ragged sigh, he released her hand and lowered his head. You're right, he murmured. We've done enough. Holmes motioned for us to lead them back through the tunnel. emerging into the frigid night where Constable Henslow was waiting, his face a mixture of relief and trepidation. "Take them into custody, Constable," Holmes instructed, "but treat them with dignity. Their story will be heard." Henslow nodded, gesturing to his men. As they were led away, Isabella turned to Holmes one last time. "Will you see to it that the truth comes out, Mr. Holmes? Not just about the murders, but everything?" Holmes bowed his head slightly. "I will. The truth will no longer be Thornbury's secret." As we watched them disappear into the fog, I broke the silence. "Do you think this village will ever admit its guilt, Holmes, or will it bury the Fairbourne's legacy once more?" Holmes's gaze remained fixed on the darkened horizon. "That, my dear Watson, is beyond our control. But tonight we have given the truth a voice, and if it speaks loudly enough, it may haunt Thornbury more effectively than any ghost ever could." The days that followed saw Thornbury slowly emerge from the shadow of its haunting past. With Holmes's meticulous guidance, evidence of the Fairbourne family's wrongful demise and the villagers' complicity was revealed. The mechanical contraptions that had fueled the ghostly terror were dismantled and displayed as proof of the deception, forcing the villagers to confront the truth they had ignored for so long. Public meetings were held in the village green, where testimonies were given, and the weight of collective guilt was laid bare. Some wept, others remained stone-faced, but none could deny the injustice. The constable, under Holmes's urging, ensured that Isabella and Percival were not painted simply as criminals, but as victims of a tragedy long in the making. Though they were charged with their crimes, the village itself bore its share of responsibility. Peace returned to Thornbury, though its scars would take time to heal. As we boarded the train bound for London, I could not help but glance back at the mist-covered moors, wondering how long it would take for the village to truly be free of its ghosts. Several days after our return to Baker Street, Holmes sat in his chair, engrossed in a monograph on ancient traps, when a knock at the door interrupted our routine. Mrs. Hudson entered, carrying a letter. "A letter from Thornbury, Mr. Holmes," she said. Holmes opened it and read silently, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He handed the letter to me, and I read its contents with keen interest. "Dear Mr. Holmes, I write to you with immense gratitude for your efforts in restoring peace to Thornbury. Thanks to your guidance, the village has not only faced its past, but has begun to heal. The evidence you uncovered ensured that the Fairbourne family's name was cleared, and the villagers themselves insisted that Isabella Fairbourne and Percival Hawksley faced justice, but with a degree of mercy. Isabella and Percival have been sentenced to 10 years of imprisonment, not for vengeance, but for the lives lost in the course of their actions. The villagers now understand their role in the events that led to this tragedy. I believe that your intervention has saved not just 2 lives, but an entire community from the burden of further secrets and lies. With gratitude, Constable Rupert Henslow." I set the letter down, reflecting on its meaning. Holmes leaned back in his chair, lighting his pipe with a serene expression. "The work is done, Watson," he said. "A village haunted by guilt has been exorcised, and a semblance of justice has been restored. It is not perfect, but then justice seldom is." I nodded. "But you gave them the chance to confront the truth. That alone may be enough to free Thornbury from its ghosts." Holmes smiled faintly. "Perhaps. And now, Watson, let us turn our minds to something new. The world rarely waits long to deliver its next mystery. Thank you for tuning in to Cafe Stories. If you enjoyed the intrigue and suspense, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on more captivating detective adventures. Your support keeps the stories coming and the mysteries alive.